Eagle 7 here, and in this video I want to talk about climbs and descents. When we refer to a climb or a descent, it can be in two ways in a helicopter. It can be what we call a cyclic climb or a cyclic descent. That's simply using forward or aft pressure of our cyclic, which changes the pitch of our nose or pitch attitude. Okay, and that can cause us to climb, or it can cause us to descend. The one problem with a cyclic climb or a cyclic descent is that we're going to either lose airspeed or we're going to gain airspeed, and in some circumstances we might not want to do that. And it's for very small changes in altitude. So if our cruising altitude was 1,000 and we creeped up to 1,100, we could use a cyclic descent, little forward pressure on the cyclic, make a slow descent. So we'll trade off just a little bit of our airspeed to get back onto our cruising altitude. And same thing with the climbs. We got a little low, we could just a little aft cyclic, pitch the nose up. We could bleed a little bit of trade our airspeed for a little bit of altitude. Small adjustments. Normal climbs and descents are going to be used with collective, either increasing or decreasing the collective. So remember, pitch controls airspeed, collective controls altitude. And that'll become important in the landing phase. We discussed some of that in the normal approach to landing, but let me go out and demonstrate these two types of climbs and descents, and then we can talk about making our final approach into a landing. So let's bring it up into a hover. And from here we just lower the nose slightly, let our airspeed build up, maintaining directional control with the anti-torque pedals, 40 knots, increase our collective a little left pedal, and now we want to use our cyclic here to pitch for 70 knots. We want that nose at an attitude that will give us a 70 knot climb out. So if we hold it here, you can see we're at 53. If I lower the nose, we're still going to climb, but our airspeed's also going to increase. So we have to find that sweet spot in the pitch, right about maybe there, 70, 71, 72, and we can adjust from there. We're a little fast, a little aft cyclic. That'll slow our airspeed, but we're still climbing. So there's 1,000. Let's go ahead and level off. And so from here, at about 1,000 feet, 65 knots. Now if I wanted to do a cyclic climb, let's say I was a little low, and I just wanted to increase my altitude by 50 feet, 100 feet, I could just simply apply a little aft cyclic. You'll see the nose come up. As the nose comes up, you can see we're gaining altitude, but we've sacrificed on the left side some of our airspeed for that altitude. So we'll go ahead and level off, lower the cyclic, a little forward cyclic. Let's get our airspeed back. And then if we're at 57 knots, now if we wanted a cyclic to descend with a cyclic, we just ease the cyclic forward, a little forward pressure. And you see we can lose altitude, but as we're losing altitude, we're gaining airspeed. So there might be circumstances in which we don't want to do that. So let's go ahead and level off again. And now let's say that we wanted to do a climb, but we wanted to maintain around 65, 66 knots. So what we would do is we would increase our collective, anticipate a little left pedal, increase that collective. You see the nose will rise a little bit, so a little forward cyclic, just a little bit. Now we can hold 66. Now our airspeed's increasing, so we want to aft cyclic a little bit. We were looking for 65. So lift that nose up, airspeed will slow down. And now find that sweet spot in the pitch, and there's 65 knots. So now we're climbing out at 65, constant airspeed climb. So let's go ahead and level off. So as we level off again, get our power set where we want it, about 54%. And now we use the cyclic to pitch for an airspeed. So let's say we want 70 in this case. So let's pitch for 70. We need to bring that nose up a little bit, lower that collective just a tiny bit. We'll bring that nose up, little down collective. And there's 70 knots. And same thing with the descent now. If I wanted to descend at 70 knots, I would lower my collective, anticipate right pedal, and I'd have to bring, the nose is going to want to dip a little, so I'm going to have to anticipate just a little bit of back pressure, right pedal, not too much, whatever it takes, remember in a helicopter. So we're at 69. If I wanted to hit 70, I would have to increase airspeed, I have to lower the nose slightly. There you go. And hold that. Now, we're descending at a constant airspeed descent. Now we're a little high, 71, just a little aft cyclic, bring the nose up, there you go, it'll bleed the airspeed off. So let's go ahead and level off here at 500 feet. Now this becomes important to understand the relationship between your collective for altitude and your cyclic for pitch when we're coming into land. Some people are leaving comments that they're still having some trouble, you know, from doing 100, 110 knots and getting down into that 500 feet, 60 knots, 500 feet, 70 knot airspeed to begin their approach. So remember that your collective controls your altitude and your cyclic pitch controls your airspeed. So now when we come in for a normal approach, what we're looking for, and we'll practice some here. Now we're looking to trade our altitude and our airspeed together or in a coordinated fashion, right? So down collective, right pedal, a little aft cyclic. You want to keep that nose up just a little bit. So now we're kind of in a constant airspeed descent. But as we come into land, obviously we have to bleed airspeed. If we descend and we don't lose airspeed, we're going to come in too fast. So here we are descending, but our airspeed is still high. So remember that the cyclic controls pitch. So now if I need to get that walking speed of like 40 knots, obviously I have to pitch the nose up. But now as I pitch the nose up, we're going to climb a little. So it's down collective, aft cyclic. And now we can pitch for our airspeed, let's say 50. Now we can hold 50. Now we might have to bring some collective in. Alright, and then lower the nose slightly. We're 47, 48, we want 50. So there's 50. So now we're descending, still descending at about 50 knots. So we're simulating we're on approach. So now as I'm getting closer to my intended point of landing, let's say I want to slow it down to 40 knots. So I got to lower the collective slightly, anticipate with anti-torque, and I've got to bring that nose up a little bit, right? Pitch controls airspeed. If I want to slow, I have to bring a little aft cyclic, a little up collective. Now I'm at 40 knots. So now adjust your collective and your pitch, your collective and your pitch, to hold 40 knots. So this is at walking speed, kind of like stair-stepping down. We're 60 knots, 50 knots, 40 knots, 30 knots. We're still descending. Now if I want to go say to 30, excuse me, 30 knots, lower the collective a little bit, little aft cyclic, rudder pedals for directional control. That aft cyclic is going to slow our airspeed, and as we come on close to our 30 knots, we're going to have to increase our collective slightly, and then use the cyclic for pitch, and now I can descend at 30 knots. And so this is that walking, stair-stepping. We're descending, slowing, descending, slowing, descending, slowing, descending, slowing, and it's a smooth process. Once you get comfortable with it, it's becomes a kind of like I talked in my previous videos, a rhythm. You just, instead of doing it 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, it becomes a fluid motion. as you make your approach into landing. So let's go ahead and get back up here to 500 feet and 60 knots. Remember, pitch controls airspeed, collective controls altitude. So there's 60 knots. A little fast, so we're going to raise the nose just a little bit, lower that collective. We don't want to gain altitude. We want to maintain a constant altitude, pitch the nose up, so we slow that airspeed. So now as we come into our helipad here, we start our slowing down. There's 50. So now I can start my slow descent. I'll hold 50, pitch for 50. And if you look out the window, that helipad should stay relatively stationary in your windshield. You're driving the helicopter to the H on that helipad. You're adjusting all of your controls as necessary to keep that H pretty stationary in the window until probably the last 30 feet or so. So you can see it getting a little high in the window, right? So we want to lower the collective, little right pedal, and a little aft cyclic. Let's slow it down to 40 knots now. And you'll see as we pitch up the sight picture, that heliport H there goes lower in the window. Lower the collective, more aft cyclic. You see how that H is where we want to land, is staying right in the window. Now we're 38. Now we want a little collective because of our sync rate. Now this is where it's just fine tuning. Little up collective, little aft cyclic. There's 25 knots. Now as we come into our spot, increase collective, left anti-torque pedal. Okay, now we're transitioning from forward flight into a hover taxi. Increase collective, a little forward cyclic, or just relax that back pressure, and touch down right on the H. So you can see there's a constant airspeed climb and descent, and there's a cyclic airspeed and descent, but you can see the relationship between pitch and airspeed, collective and altitude, and you start working those together. Down collective, aft cyclic slows you down, and then you start with the stair stepping. You know, pick a spot. So I'm going to start at 500 feet, 60 knots, and by this point on my final approach I should be at 50 knots, 400 feet, and so on, and kind of stair step down. Work on that until it becomes one fluid motion. I hope that helps, and we'll see you on the next one.